Heroes worldwide, this is FSN.
Ah, the lies about Ukraine, eh? The lies about Ukraine. How you doing? It's Tuesday. It's raining cats and dogs. No, it really is. It's bucketing down here in Salford and Greater Manchester. My name is Richie Allen. Hope you've had a great Tuesday. It is June 4th, 2019. As you'd expect, I've got two terrific guests lined up for you today, and I'm looking forward to you meeting them. Before we do that, though, let's get on with the show. By the way, tweet me right now. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. That's the way to reach the programme when it is live.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Who sang that? All the lies that you told me. I can't remember if it was Francis Black or Mary Black. Anyway, very interesting show for you this Tuesday. Joining me this hour, returning to the programme, Heather Brunskell-Evans will be back on the programme. She's a philosopher and social theorist. Now, the Scouts have done a U-turn on a transgender policy that many believed would put young people's safety at risk. Very controversial advice given to Scout leaders 2 years ago. But it's been scrapped now. And Heather Brunskell-Evans is happy about that. We'll talk to her this hour. And coming up in the second hour, love him or loathe him, and I happen to love him. Kevin Myers is an outstanding journalist and author. Irishman, born in England, but an Irishman, wrote for the Sunday Times, the Times, the Sunday Independent. Famously, of course, fired less than a couple of years ago for nothing, for making a gag in an article he wrote about the BBC gender pay gap. Why is Kevin returning to this parish? Well, because we're going to talk about Julia Hartley-Brewer, deplatformed by the Royal College of GPs because of a tweet some years ago. Galloway fired because of a tweet he made on Saturday night. Jeremy Corbyn, I don't want to meet Donald Trump because he's offensive. What's going on? Kevin Myers in the second hour. Your Richie Allen Show, Europe's most listened to independent radio show, live on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv, my own website, and TuneIn Radio as well. Tell you what, I had a good day today because somebody made my day today, and it was a man called Michael Doyle, and Michael is in Thailand, and he worked on Sureside Radio and WLR back in the late 1970s in Waterford. He's a Waterfordian. He's a Daisha man, just like myself, and he's in Thailand with he's running thesanctuarythailand.com. It is a detox centre, and he's running it there in Thailand. And he sent me a donation to the programme this morning, which was lovely, and told me who he was and that he used to work in radio in Waterford as well. But now he's out and about working in Thailand, and he's not asked me to do this, and he's certainly not given me any money for doing this, but his website is thesanctuarythailand.com, thesanctuarythailand.com, because one good turn deserves another, and that made my day today. Thanks, Michael, and lovely to meet you through this programme. Isn't it wonderful? Ah, Donald Trump, eh? Donald. Here's something. I'm not easily shocked, you know, because I've seen a lot, and I've heard a lot in my time, as maybe you have. But Matthew Thompson, pronounce your THs, is a reporter for LBC, and he filmed a man who is a Donald Trump supporter being accosted by and then assaulted by protesters in London. Very sick scenes. Why sick? What's different, you might ask? Well, there's a woman screaming in the man's face, millimetres from his face, screaming at him in a complete frenzy. Nazi scum, Nazi scum, Nazi scum. Matthew Thompson of LBC said the guy was just there with his own, he was there basically to say, well, I support Donald Trump. I don't agree with the protest. I like Donald Trump, and I've not seen such hatred and anger and vitriol And you don't expect to see it on the face of a woman, do you? Call me sexist if you want, I don't care. Maybe there's a little bit of sexism in all of us, maybe. You don't expect to see women doing that. Horrible stuff. And that is the progressive left. It is sick to see that. And they call themselves progressives and all the rest of it, but that is not the traditional left. Socialists do not, have not, and could not behave like that when confronted by somebody who has a different point of view to them. It is rotten. Jeremy Corbyn was in London today. Corbyn is the third worst Labour leader that ever lived. A complete and utter fraud. A champagne socialist, I only wish he was. A faux socialist, a joke, a ridiculous fecking human being. Listen to this garbage from Jeremy Corbyn addressing the crowd in London today.
So I say to our visitors that have arrived this week, think on, please, about a world that is one of peace and disarmament.
You could have said it to his face, you useless yellow bastard, Corbyn. You nothing. You fringe campaigner. You nobody. You nobody. You loser. You could have stood with him with a glass of champagne in your hand last night, eating canapes before you were then brought into the main dining hall, and you could have said whatever you wanted to him. You loser. You miserable muppet.
Is one of recognising the values of all people, is a world that defeats racism, defeats misogyny,
sloganeering,
defeats the religious hatred,
sloganeering doesn't mean anything,
that are being fuelled by the far right,
empty rhetoric
in politics, in Britain, in Europe and the United States. They have no answers to young people growing up worried about their future. No answers to communities that have lost their industries. No answers for the people that are desperate in all parts of the world to get somewhere.
One of the worst public speakers of all time, isn't he?
Get somewhere to live. No answers to those people that are desperate to get the medical help and support that they need. No answers to those going through a mental health crisis.
He's got no answers either.
Of any sort.
Sloganeering.
All over the world. Do you know what? Together we can make a big difference.
Sloganeering. We never heard that one before, did we? Together we can make a difference.
Together we can change this world.
Oh, we can change this world if we just listen to you.
Together we can bring about that peace and justice. And by our demonstration here today, we've shown just how determined we, all of us, are to achieve that better place and that better world. Thank you for being here today for peace, for justice and disarmament.
Yeah, the guy's a lunatic. That's empty sloganeering. Imagine going to Trafalgar Square or wherever it was, whatever park they were in, and saying, let's send a message today. And did anybody standing there think, well, you could have actually been there last night and you could have put these points of view to him? I got into this on the newspaper reviews this morning. This is supposed to be a friend of Palestine. You could have been there. Wretched Corbyn, a malicious, malignant muppet. Wretched. Donald Trump was asked about Corbyn and Khan after he'd met with Theresa May.
For you, President Trump, as you hold talks with the current Prime Minister, the leader of Her Majesty's opposition has been addressing a protest rally against your visit in Trafalgar Square. He says he's disappointed you attacked the London mayor and he criticised your record on refugees. What do you have to say to him? And is this man someone you could do a trade deal with? And to you, Prime Minister, do you think that Sadiq Khan is a stone-cold loser?
Stone-cold loser.
Thank you.
You're talking about the Mayor of London. Is that who you said? Yes. Well, I think he's been a not very good mayor from what I understand. He's done a poor job. Crime is up, a lot of problems. And I don't think he should be criticizing a representative of the United States that can do so much good for the United Kingdom. We talked about it before. He should be positive, not negative. He's a negative force, not a positive force.
The good that Trump is talking about is a trade deal, which would open up the National Health Service to US healthcare providers who would come in and take over contracts in the NHS. That's the big trade deal he's talking about. It's taking over the National Health Service, which massive pharmaceutical companies in the United States have coveted for years. They're all the same, these people.
And if you look at what he said, he hurts the people of this great country. And I think he should actually focus on his job. It'd be a lot better if he did that. He could straighten out some of the problems that he has and probably some of the problems that he's caused.
Which ones are those?
I don't know Jeremy Corbyn. Never met him. Never spoke to him. He wanted to meet today or tomorrow, and I decided that I would not do that.
So Trump is as bad as Corbyn, if that's true. Right?
I think that he is, from where I come from, somewhat of a negative force. I think that people should look to do things correctly as opposed...
Yeah, let's just move it on. There was a bit of light humour when Theresa May reminded Trump that she had secured a deal with the European Union, despite his advice, which was to sue the European Union. Bit of lightheartedness.
And I seem to remember the President suggested that I sued the European Union, which we didn't do. We went into negotiations and we came out with a good deal.
Yeah, that's not such a... I would have sued, but that's okay. I would have sued and settled, maybe, but you never know. She's probably a better negotiator than I am, Jeremy. But you know what? She has got it, in a sense, John. That deal is teed up. I think that deal is really teed up. I think they have to do something. And perhaps you won't be given the credit that you deserve if they do something. But I think you deserve a lot of credit. I really do. I think you deserve a lot of credit.
Two puppets standing side by side. I loved hearing Emily Thornberry on LBC this morning with Nick Ferrari. Emily Thornberry is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and she was on defending the boycott. You see, again, Labour could have went to this banquet and could have said to Trump, you're not going to get your hands on the NHS, Donald. Not you specifically, but the puppet masters that you serve. And Donald, while you're at it, we have some questions about human rights. And Donald, while we're at it, we've got some questions about misogyny and all that crap. But they decided not to go. This is the lesson they're teaching generations of children to come. Don't speak to people whom disagree with you. Just ignore them and hope they go away. Well, they're not going away. People who disagree with you. But anyway, Nick Ferrari tied Thornberry up in knots today. I love this. Presenters of the world, unite and take over. I love when a presenter does somebody like... Oh, the language is not good there, Richie. Does for somebody like Emily Thornberry.
Some of my listeners are rather puzzled. He can sit down with President Xi, he can sit down with people from the IRA, Hamas and Hezbollah, but not with the democratically elected President of the United States.
But to a certain extent that's the same question again, because what we've said is that we would be prepared. Of course we would be prepared.
But only on your terms.
Discuss it. No. On the terms that we can actually discuss things.
No, but on Labour terms, not on the terms that it work for the US President. You can only sit down with him on Labour's terms.
Let's. Okay, I'll tell you what. Exactly how much interest does he show in British politicians? What he's done is before.
Well, plenty. He spends half the night, most nights, talking about Sadiq Khan, I would have said.
He's done is before he even landed, he's talking about what a great Prime Minister Boris Johnson will make. I mean, it's none of his business. We're a democracy. We ought to be deciding who our Prime Minister is. Thank you very much for the advice, President Trump. But no, we will decide who our Prime Minister is, or at least we should do. And
but it's your business who should be President of the US.
No.
Well, it is, because you've just said he doesn't stand for the democratic
Well, I don't
values.
believe that he does. I don't believe that he does.
So he can have a view. He can't have a view on who runs this country, but you can have a view on who's running of his country.
No.
He's tied you up in knots there, love. He's done you up like a kipper there, love. That's exactly what you're saying. He can't opine on all matters UK politics, but you can regularly say whatever you want about him and the people around him. You see?
Powerful man in the world arrives in the UK, and before he does so, he starts telling us who should be our next Prime Minister, and indeed saying that Nigel Farage should be part of the negotiating team when it comes to. And isn't it interesting the sort of people who he likes? The sort of men who he likes. And look at exactly who is it that he stands up that he thinks is so wonderful, and what it is that he says about Sadiq Khan. I mean, it's extraordinary, frankly, and I think that it says a great deal.
Yeah, misogyny, hate speech, and all the rest of it. Tied her up in knots. On Corbyn, no, let's leave Corbyn alone. I've had enough of Corbyn. I meant every word of it earlier on, by the way. He's no better or no worse than any other politician, but I reserve a special place in my heart for despising Corbyn. I despise him. The sound of him, the look of him. Just leave it, Richie. Leave it. These guys calling themselves socialists. Here's an interesting thing from Fox News. Good evening, by the way, to Chris Poacher, who's listening to the programme in Sacoma in Mallorca. How you doing, Chris? Mallorca. Lovely. There is a Colorado governor called John Hickenlooper. He's a Democrat. And he was addressing a rally of Democrats in California. And he brings up socialism. Have a listen to, because we're on the subject of socialism, have a listen to Tucker Carlson of Fox News introduce the clip. Then you'll hear Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. What a name that is, Hickenlooper. Should have been a Premier League fullback. Hickenlooper. So he's addressing Democrats, and it's all about socialism.
Watch their response when Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who's also running for president, reminds them that actually socialism doesn't really work.
If we want to beat Donald Trump and achieve big progressive goals, socialism is not the answer. I was reelected. If we're not careful, we're going to end up helping to reelect the worst president in American history.
So that's the point where Hickenlooper should have paused and called out the audience like a stand-up comic and asked them to name a single place outside of Sweden in the 1970s in which socialism has actually worked.
Venezuela.
Anyone?
Venezuela.
But of course he didn't do that. He was too afraid.
Too afraid to say Venezuela because they would have laughed at him. Because nobody in your country, Tucker, knows that the situation Venezuela finds itself in is as a direct result of sanctions imposed on it by successive governments in your country. Tucker Carlson is a decent guy. He's a good presenter. I think his heart is in the right place. But like everybody else in the world, except me. Except me. And that includes you, listener. You know nothing about socialism either. Some form today, boy. Nobody knows anything about socialism. And where it has been tried, in Latin America, and where it has succeeded, in Chile, in Venezuela, and up to a point in Cuba, the media and Western governments have done everything they can to destroy it, to prevent it from working, but also to brainwash the world's wider population into thinking that socialism is lunacy and ultimately ends up bankrupting a country. It doesn't. That is garbage. Told you before what socialism is, how it's worked, where it's worked, and it never involved taxing people who have done well through their own companies, who have made their own way in the world. It's not about taxing the rich to the point of extinction and just throwing it at poor people. That's not socialism, but that's what Fox News, Sky News, ITV, Channel 4, C-SPAN, CNBC, CNN and all the rest of them will tell you. Let's talk a little bit about free speech. Nigel Farage, by the way, my friend and colleague Jean Ann Crowley in Cleggan in Ireland asks a brilliant question, and it didn't occur to me today. It should have occurred to me. Why didn't journalists today at the Trump May press conference ask about Julian Assange? Why didn't they? Of course they didn't. Never any danger that any journalist is going to say, hey, listen, Mr. Trump, why do you want to extradite Julian Assange? And Mrs. May, why are you thinking strongly about going along with it? Well, she can't obviously influence the decision. It's a court decision, but she'll endorse it. No journalist asked it because journalists just don't look out for each other anymore. That's the reason. On free speech, Anne Widdecombe of this parish, regular contributor to my programmes, was lambasted for talking about, gays and lesbians and science on Sky News on Sunday. Nigel Farage was on GMTV with his friend Piers Morgan this morning. They are friends. Morgan asked him for his own views after they'd had a back and forth about free speech. Morgan said, what about you, Nige? What do you think about all this conversion therapy and gayness?
Piers, I will take no stand on this whatsoever.
Really?
I certainly won't. No, I believe in issues of conscience. I believe it very strongly.
But what is your belief about?
I think it was too much.
Okay, but that's fine.
Well, I tell you
but
what
is your belief about homosexuality? Do you believe that people can be cured of homosexuality through science?
I very much doubt human beings can be cured of anything. I think we're born the way we are.
Should they be cured?
And we tend to stay with our characteristics for the whole of our life.
Is homosexuality
this is a serious thing for gay people in this country. Gay people want to know, is the Brexit Party on their side?
Gay people couldn't give a shit. The majority of them couldn't give a knickers. Couldn't give an underpants. That's a fact. I have canvassed the handful, because it's only a handful these days, of gay men and women I know. And I said, listen, what do you think? Couldn't give a shit, Richie. It's as simple as that. I've got a mortgage to pay this month, Rich. I'm up to my neck. My car's broken down, Rich. These are real world problems. What Anne Widdecombe or Nigel Farage thinks about my sexuality, I couldn't give an arse.
Their side or not. And you're reluctant to say that gay people can't be cured by science. Will alarm them.
I haven't commented on it. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put Louis Steadman Bryce, who is gay, who was our MEP for Scotland, and you can have him on your programme tomorrow and ask him how he feels about it.
I'm asking you. You're the leader of the party.
Yes, and I will not support or condemn individuals for their views on abortion, on homosexuality, on issues of conscience.
Oh, but do you personally believe homosexuality is a sin?
No, I don't.
Okay, so do you think that... Do you personally believe that...
As I've said already...
Yeah, but do you personally believe that... I think it's important, Nigel, this.
So do I. That's why I'm saying it again.
I don't think you should wriggle off the hook of responsibility as a party leader for one of the biggest issues in this country, which is gay rights, right, and equality. Do you personally believe gay people can be converted back to being heterosexual?
I thought in terms of gay rights and equality, there was legislation in place. I thought we'd done that work already.
But what is your belief? Do you think people can be cured?
I thought we'd done that. No, Piers, I've said once already, and I'll say it again, I think we're born the way we are, and basically, through our lives, we very rarely change at all.
Just the way we are. There you go. That was a waste of 10 minutes between Piers Morgan and Nigel Farage earlier on. Do me a favour, if you are gay and you don't agree with my contention that gay people don't care, do let me know on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @RichieAllenShow. That's my Twitter handle. And I'll be delighted to hear from you if you think I'm talking through my sphincter, as I quite often do. We're going to get our first guest on now. It's a pretty packed old programme today. And I know there'll be a lot of interest in this. I mentioned a short time ago about the Scouts in the UK doing a U-turn on a transgender policy that had been claimed would put young people's safety at risk. This is very serious, and I covered this nearly 2 years ago, very controversial. So then, advice that Scout leaders should not call children boys or girls has been scrapped. That was one of the recommendations at the time. Crazy, but true. The Scouts do accept boys and girls of all ages. They've rescinded advice that a child's gender transition must be treated with complete confidentiality, including being kept from parents. Majorly controversial, that. The guidance now says from the Scouts the information must be shared with families or the authorities if there are welfare concerns. The Scouts' Equal Opportunities Policy has been revised to include the category of sex, previously omitted, in favour of gender identity. And very importantly, most references to the transgender lobby group Mermaids have been dropped, have been removed by the Scouts guidelines. And Sunday just gone, a couple of days ago, there was a letter to the Sunday Times, published in the Sunday Times, entitled "Trans Ideology is Damaging Children." It was a letter welcoming the U-turn even by the Scouts, and one of the signatories to that letter was a lady who was on this programme last year, Dr Heather Brunskell-Evans, who's a philosopher and social theorist. And Heather, I'm delighted to welcome you back. How are you?
Hello, Richie. It's good to talk to you again.
Lovely to talk to you again. Thanks, Heather. This is news that came out last week. I'm a little bit behind on it, but it didn't get a lot of coverage. It must be said it didn't in the UK press, even though it's a major story, because the Scouts' advice published a couple of years ago was very worrying and very concerning for many people. This U-turn, where has this U-turn come from, do you think, Heather? Why have they done it?
I that what is going on is that the kind of pressure that is now being put on the transgender policies and transgender ideology, there are concerted efforts to put pressure on it, including from me, but from many other people, is actually beginning to have a little bit of an effect. I mean, it's absolute madness that this equal opportunities policy was put in place in the first place. I mean, it beggars belief, actually, and many of your listeners will not be able to believe that it was a policy not to talk to children, not to name children as either boys or girls. So the fact that they've rescinded a bit should have got more attention.
But it hasn't.
Not quite. Sorry?
My apologies, but it hasn't. That's the strange thing.
That's the strange thing. And I don't know what's going on. I wonder whether two things might be going on. One might be fatigue, actually. I think people are getting a bit fed up of all of this. Sort of trans ideology fatigue. But a more worrying idea might be that when those people who are trying to draw the nation's attention to such madness, if they can be targeted as just bigoted people, then that does get a lot of media attention. But when somebody listens to us, it gets less media attention. So if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say that there is something significant about that we don't get attention when we successfully critique the ideology.
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting that. When the Scouts published the guidelines, it was a very strange time for radio producers, because at that time we were hearing stories or reading stories and then cross-referencing and checking them and finding they were true. Stories like there was a movement within the National Health Service to stop referencing things like pregnant women and using pregnant person and stuff like that. And at the time I was kind of mystified by this, and I was thinking, what's bloody well going on here? But a lot of that was going on. Is that still going on, Heather?
Oh, yeah, that's still going on. That's increasing, actually. I think people are now getting a bit worried about what's actually happening to children. But as far as women are concerned, that is still going on, and that's getting worse. And the trouble is, your listeners probably can't quite believe this, because it sounds like a fantasy. But if you actually go into it, as you have done, and search for the evidence, it's all there. It's absolutely all there. Other countries are even further down that road than us. Canada, for example, is further down that road than us, but it's coming to us increasingly. Yes, you can't. Apparently, it's discriminatory to say breastfeeding now. One must say chest feeding. So all words that reference the biological sex, the woman's biological body as being, there's an attempt to erase it on the basis that it's not fair to men who identify as women to name women's body parts, because apparently, I know your readers will think this is, listeners will think this is absolutely bizarre. The claim is that men who identify as women actually are women, literally. Therefore, for a biological woman like myself, for example, to name any part of my body is discriminating against them. Because what I'm actually saying is that there is such a thing as women who are, they're women by virtue of the fact that they're biologically female.
This is insane. So when the NHS was saying, don't use terms like pregnant women, say pregnant person, ultimately the reason for that was so that men who identify as women, their feelings wouldn't be hurt. Is that it?
So.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not. I wish I was. I really wish I was. I was just thinking, because I think this is the second conversation that we've had about this.
Yeah.
And, you know, I suppose I've been thinking that in the intervening gap of time, it might have got a little bit better, but it hasn't. It might be getting a little bit better with regard to children, because people can, in a sense, see what is happening to children. But all of this, this assault, really, on women's rights to bodily autonomy, to name their own bodies as they choose to name their own body according to biological reality, and all the other things that go along with it, sort of, you know, women's traditional spaces like rape crisis centres or domestic violence refuges or women's prisons, all of the women's rights to be there away from men are now being undermined.
Are you sorry, Heather?
Yeah.
We spoke about the person who calls themselves Karen. What's the surname? It's not Thompson.
White.
Yes, well done. That's the one who was jailed for sexual offences and then assaulted women in prison. This person was a man who identified as a woman, and there was a quite justifiable outrage, I think, amongst most kind of decent-thinking, decent-minded people. Were you shocked to learn in the press over the weekend that while this hasn't quite happened again, a man who identifies as a woman and committed an unspeakable murder, slashing the throat of a woman and was sentenced to life in prison for it, was actually sent to a female prison and was found to be having sex with a female inmate who may have problems and might be vulnerable herself? Can you believe that has happened in light of the Karen White case? How could that happen again, or something like it?
Well, Richie, I would like to say that I'm shocked by this happening again. But the truth is, I know so much about it now, but I'm not shocked. And that says something significant, I think, that people who are aware of what's going on and who are keeping an eye on it, in a sense, are no longer shocked by this, because it doesn't matter. Women have repeatedly complained about this, and we repeatedly have our voices silenced. So it's just another case. It is shocking. It's absolutely shocking on the one hand, but it's not shocking on the other hand, because the authorities are taking very little notice of what women are saying. And by the way, I just want to say that this always gets characterized in the press as sort of feminists against this trans ideology, which places women, just ordinary women who are concerned for their children or for other women and for women's rights, that women shouldn't have to be in prison with convicted murderers and rapists. That's characterized, our position is characterized as extreme. And that is shocking. To even complain about it is characterized as coming from an extreme ideology. So it's not the trans activists that are characterized as extreme, it's the women complaining about it. And how can that be? How can that be in our society? It is unbelievable.
It's insane, Heather. The worst thing I've learned in the last couple of years, the thing that's most difficult for me to compute, is that some women are asking questions of these issues on social media. Many of them, or most of them, it appears, are not being rude or inflammatory, but yet they're finding that they're getting into trouble with their employers, that basically they are being doxed. And if our listeners don't know what doxed means, it means that maybe some of the more extreme people who support this madness go out of their way to identify the women whom are asking questions and then try to get them fired from their jobs, or even get them a visit by the police. Are we living in George Orwell's 1984, Heather? Because it seems like it.
Well, I think we are in relation to this. I think we absolutely are. So, again, your listeners won't know that the things that are said to women who can say, who point out facts, just facts, no more. So you could say, for example, that you could say that a man who identifies as a woman is actually a man, and that would be regarded as
hate speech.
As hate speech. But correspondingly, trans activists say the most unspeakable things. I'm not going to repeat them on radio because they're really shocking. And they don't get silenced. So the voices of the women are silenced and the voices of the trans activists aren't. But you know what gets said to us, and I'd like to make this clear to the listeners, what gets said to us is that if, for example, we complain about a murderer or a rapist who carried those acts out when as a man, and then starts to says that he identifies as a woman and gets put into a woman's prison, the accusation gets made that we are saying that all trans people are rapists and murderers, which is we simply are not saying that at all. So we're constantly tarred with things that we don't say, and it takes attention from what is actually happening in reality in our institutions as I speak. So no one is saying that anybody who identifies with the other sex is automatically going to carry out a crime. That would be a ridiculous thing to say, and nobody is saying that.
This is the world we live in today, though. It's a sad indictment. I've been around the media for many, many years, and we, journalists and presenters and writers have always been accused of looking for the sensational, but in truth, it's never as bad, or it never was as bad as it is now. I see those same headlines, and I know that there's no substance to those accusations. I know that you're talking about one specific case and you're not referencing trans people in general, but this is the horrendous media landscape we're living in. Let me just read a few tweets because there's lots. Murray tweets, Richie, can trans women get pregnant? That's a sarcastic tweet. The answer is no. It's a mad, mad, mad world, says Liz Jones. It's difficult to keep hopeful these days. Kelly finds it amusing and horrifying, the term chest feeding. It is ridiculous. It's absolutely crazy. Tiger tweets, that sort of language is new speak and double think in full force. If you want to see what other people are tweeting, go to twitter.com, and if you put Richie Allen Show in all one word. Heather is on Twitter as well. I'll put a link to where you can find her and follow her on Twitter, and to her website as well. There's loads to talk about. Do you have sympathy with the mostly Asian community in Birmingham and other parts of the country whom are asking questions about teaching very young children to think and to talk about these issues, sexuality and gender identity? I know some of the Asian folks will maybe have a conservative outlook on the world. They might, take a conservative view of Islam, and that's okay, that's what they are. But many of them will be moderate, and they will be saying, look, we just don't think it's appropriate for children to consider these issues. What's interesting, Heather, for me is you see a lot of white people now joining these protests, Christians saying, well, look, we're a bit concerned as well. These are issues for the parent to deal with when the child decides it's ready to ask these questions. So are you watching those protests in Birmingham and elsewhere, and what do you think of them?
Yeah, I am watching them. I think it's very convenient for the trans activist movement to say, look, the kinds of people who are objecting to the change that's going on in schools, including for primary schools, around sex and relationship education. You see, it's only conservative people who are objecting. It's only those people over there who haven't quite got to the 21st century. They're backward thinking. We are progressive. So it's very useful to that set of people that this is happening. But what I personally think is that a lot of people, whether you're from the Asian community, Christian community, or any other community, would be worried about the prospective changes to the kinds of teaching that we will be putting in place very soon if this bill goes through. A lot of people are not aware of it, actually, but we will be teaching children that it is possible to be born a girl in a boy's body and vice versa, and all the attendant things that go with that. And what I would call, and I'm putting this in inverted commas, the progressive community Many of the people who belong to that community, if they know about it, think that there's nothing wrong with that kind of education, or they're afraid themselves to speak out in case they're tarred with the brush of being bigots, traditionalists, and so on. So you talk about 1984. This is going on. A lot of people are objecting. Some people don't speak out. So I absolutely applaud these people, actually, for having the guts to stand up for protecting children's innocence, actually. And by that, I don't mean this old-fashioned thing that children shouldn't, they should be kept ignorant. I don't mean that. But what I do mean is we're actually telling children untruths now. We're not giving them biological facts.
Yeah, you're not. If you're born with the male chromosomes and you have male sexual reproductive organs, you are a male, and that's the end of it as far as I'm concerned. And I've never been a virtue signaller, Heather, never in my life. I always say what I feel. If you've got, if you identify as, if you are a man and you identify as a woman and you want me to refer to you as a female name of your choice, I'm happy to do that because I'm a pretty easygoing guy and I don't see why I wouldn't do it if you asked me to do it. And that's where I leave it. Live and let live. But this is something entirely disturbing and wrong. Let me ask you this, because as a feminist, if I'm allowed to categorise you as such.
You are.
There is an aspect to this. If we just take a little side track for a second. I've also been a bit worried about schools introducing, oh God, I can't even think of the terminology now, but they want youngsters to switch around gender roles. So they want, in schools and primary schools, they want to start encouraging girls to dress up as firemen and traditional male roles, and they want young boys to start dressing up and pretending to be and thinking about jobs in what we would have thought as traditional female roles. Now, I know some feminists like this. I don't like it for the same reasons or similar reasons as to why I don't like this sexual education. I just think leave children alone. What about the gender education or the gender roles in society education? What do you think of that?
Well, as far as kids are concerned, I think that kids should be allowed to dress up in whatever dressing up clothes they want to from the dressing up box in their primary school. Just let them get on with it and stop directing them.
Brilliant.
Secondly, what I think we should encourage boys and girls to do whatever they want to do, actually. So I think it is important for girls to understand that they can take up any job that they want and be as ambitious as boys. And I think it's important to let boys know that it's really cool to want to play with the dolls or be nurturing if that's what they want. So it used to, this isn't a new thing. People, the young kids, the teenagers, they think this is all new. This isn't new. The kinds of equal opportunity stuff that came into schools in the 1970s, for example, it did make a difference. More girls are going to university now and so on and so forth. Boys can choose to be nurses or primary school teachers and so on. That's all fantastic.
Heather, let me interrupt you for a minute. My apologies. You're touching on something that I'm fascinated by. What was different in the 1970s in terms of how they introduced the thinking to girls? Because I hear you loud and clear. If I was a school teacher and I heard a little girl in my class say, oh, that's a boy's job, I would say to her, hey, listen, in fact, I can give you 15 or 20 women that are doing that job successfully. You can be whatever you want. That's what I would say as a teacher. But it's different now. It's more creepy, I think, now. What were they doing in the 70s that was obviously better? What were they doing then?
Right. And this is really important. I hope I don't lose the listeners here, but this is really important. What happened in the 1970s, for example, was the idea that biological sex was just a reality. It was a reality. But that gender was more to do with stereotypes. So what we did was we tried to just get rid of the stereotypes. Why conform to stereotypes? We need to be more free than that. Let's try and get rid of the stereotypes. What's happening now is, and it's really insidious and pernicious, is that the trans ideology is saying that the body, differences between boys and girls, somehow that's socially constructed. I'm going to lose your readers here, I hope.
Not at all. No, we're all ears, Heather. This is fascinating and important. Go ahead.
Good. And they're reversing it around. They're saying that that sense of gender, which we call stereotypes, is an inborn feeling. It's an inborn feeling. So you could know at the age of 3 that you're really female if you're a boy. And that might be because you're attracted to playing with girls' toys. It's utter, absolute codswallop.
Crap.
Let the little boy understand himself as a little boy, which is that's what he is biologically, but that he doesn't have to conform to the stereotype. That would be the freeing thing to do. So that thing that we had in the 1970s has been turned on its head. Now, it is like 1984. We are being told that you can have a female brain in a male body, or vice versa, and that's why a little boy might not just be experimenting, because kids experiment with all different things, all different kinds of roles. Let them get on with it. So this is going back before the 1970s. This is going back to very traditional views in the name of being gender fluid. It's not gender fluid. It's gender rigid. It's saying that it's not to do with stereotypes. It's somehow inherent in you. Well, where is it inherent? You know, nobody can actually quite say where it is, but they're saying that its biology is socially constructed. So they use language like that you were assigned a sex at birth, not that you are a sex at birth, but that you assigned it, as if it's society that is making a judgment.
Yeah, that's a real worry. That wasn't there another story over the weekend about an exam board coming in for criticism because of a question. The question was they showed a diagram of chromosomes to students and asked the students what gender is represented by the chromosomes.
Yes.
You must have lost your bloody mind, Heather. Excuse my French, looking at that nonsense.
But this is an example. This is the logical conclusion of the kinds of ideas that are now infiltrating our schools, and that apparently teachers, education authorities feel that they have to go along with. And now there's people who set examinations. Do you know what? This is not going to stop until the ordinary person says enough is enough. There's no basis to any of this. I think people are a bit mystified at first. They think, oh, there must be some science behind this. There's no science behind this. It's actually, we have the science on our side.
Great question, Heather. Sorry, great question coming in from Jean Ann, friend of mine in Ireland, on the west of Ireland. Why do the teachers put up with it? Brilliant question.
Well, it's really strange. I was just talking about this with somebody else today who asked me exactly the same question. You know, the teachers, getting back to the 1984 thing, teachers will say, and they say to me, behind the scenes, but they don't say it in public, either they don't understand it, or they think it's codswallop, but that they have to go along with it, because our government and our schools are now paying for trans activist groups like mermaids, gendered intelligence, all sorts, to come in and do workshops for the teachers and do workshops for the children. So the children are getting their ideas, little children and older children, from these groups, as well as the teachers. The teachers are being trained by them. So a teacher might think, oh, well, I don't quite understand this, but these people seem to have authority, so it must be true. And so it goes up the hierarchy until at some point, where does this stop? Who are we going to hold accountable for this? We have to hold somebody accountable, and it's very difficult to know who. But it's happening at the level of government, with equal opportunities policies, and so on and so forth. So it has to go up the chain. The teachers, I understand, it would be a very brave teacher that stood out against this. Because a teacher might lose his or her job. That's the reality of it.
Those are the consequences, yeah.
This is the level at which we are, all of us, being policed from standing outside and standing up against this. So unless we do it collectively, individuals can be picked off, and that's the truth of it.
More tweets coming in. Faisal tweets, we've got Heather for another 5 or 6 minutes. Faisal tweets, great guest, Richie. The 70s term gender neutrality was just about not infecting children with gender stereotypes and bias. Now it's been twisted into imposing gender categories and actually suppressing natural individuality. Thanks, Faisal. Lance tweets, refreshing to hear Heather, Richie, the voice of sense in a world of sanity. You touched on something important, Heather. This is bewildering people. It really is. Mad Monk tweets, love the Twitter names, that's what society is, pushing stereotypes. They want to put people in a box or a category. Individuals are harder to control. Somewhere you are being forced to have a label. A lot of listeners have tweeted that about the establishment or governments kind of pigeonholing people, and I have a lot of sympathy with that as well. You are delighted with the reversal by the Scouts, which is, how could you not applaud that? It's important. And you're now urging those who run girl guiding associations to do the same because they haven't yet. How bad is it with the girl guides and the brownies?
Well, it is bad. It's extremely bad, actually. And your listeners may not know that somebody who spoke out against this, a Girl Guide leader, her name is Helen Watts, spoke out about it, and her position was taken off her. She is no longer allowed to work within guiding. But your listeners may be interested to know this, a man who could identify as a woman is allowed to be a Girl Guide leader and go away on camps with young girls. So we have Helen Watts, who's been expelled from the guides, and the possibility of a man who identifies as a woman being right at the heart of the Girl Guiding Association.
But parents,
and that
surely
is 1984, is it not?
But Heather, what I struggle to come to terms with, by the way, Heather is telling the truth here. This is real. This isn't conjecture. What she said is happening, and they've put in place the facilities for this to happen, for a man who identifies as a woman to be caring for girls in the Girl Guides. I'm neither conservative nor outrageously on the left, I suppose, anymore. I don't know what I am, but I'm a moderate enough type of guy. I would never allow a daughter of mine to be cared for by a man who identifies as a woman. And I might get some stick for saying that, but I wouldn't, because I just wouldn't. Why are parents going along with it?
Well,
or are they?
A lot of parents don't actually know what's going on. They really don't know what's going on. They're not obliged. The Girl Guiding Association is not obliged, apparently, to tell parents that their children, their girls, may be going on a camp, on a residential camp, with somebody who identifies with a man who identifies as a woman.
Makes sense to me. Yeah, but what I mean by that is it makes sense. Now I understand it, because they've got to protect the trans person from bias.
So, yes.
Oh Christ! Right? Okay. Excuse my French again. Madness. Yeah. Parent doesn't know.
The what? Sorry, Rich, I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry, Heather. Yeah, I just said so. The parent then just doesn't know. Has no idea.
The parents won't know. The parents won't know about it, and of course, this brings up huge safeguarding issues, and it reverses the authority that parents should have. Parents should be in a position, it used to be, that parents were seen as the safeguarding their children. That was the parental responsibility. And that would be seen as a good thing, and it would be there would be some social sanctions against parents who didn't safeguard their children. Now it is possible for, if a parent speaks out against this, that the parents will be seen as not safeguarding their children.
Wow.
Because the parent might be seen as being bigoted. Yeah.
I don't know what to say other than, look, we're just about out of time today.
Yeah.
Should have had you back on sooner then. than this, Heather, because it's massively important. I'm not, just saying that. It's not a throwaway term by me. It is hugely important. Before I give you the final word, I just want to remind our listeners where they can find you. Heather is on. I know a lot of listeners have joined the programme tonight because of Heather, by the way. I know that. So welcome to the programme. People who wouldn't ordinarily maybe listen to this particular show. It's good to have you on board. Come back another time. Heather can be found online. Heather-Brunskell-Evans.co.uk, and it's at Brunskell-Evans on Twitter. That's Heather-Brunskell-Evans.co.uk. Mad times, Heather. Some good news. Read the Scouts. Final word to you. There's a message you'd like to leave with our listeners, and we'll leave it for today. Great to have you back. Go ahead.
Okay. My final thing that I want to say is, if you can bear it, and I know it's difficult, but if you can bear it, to start to speak out about this, because as long as we remain silent, this is going to continue. Really is a force. In and of itself, it's going to continue, and it's stoppable. It is stoppable if we join together and speak out against it.
Thanks for coming back, Heather. I really appreciate your time today. I know you're busy,
Richie.
and you're welcome back anytime. Thanks for your help today. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Heather Brunskell-Evans on the line to us from London this afternoon. Heather has been on this story and on this case now for a couple of years, more than a couple of years. She's a philosopher and social theorist, and she's edited a couple of books. If you want links to them, as I said, go to at Brunskell-Evans on Twitter. This is high lunacy, this. I'm just going to say no more about it. Don't editorialise anymore, Richie. Thanks for the tweets that came in there when Heather was on. This is the Richie Allen Show. It's coming up for 6 o'clock on Tuesday, June 4th, 2019. I'm Richie Allen, live on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv and richieallen.co.uk. Kevin Myers joins the programme after this from Bill Withers. Bill Withers on the Richie Allen Show. It's exactly 3.5 minutes past the hour, so if you've got about 10 minutes to get there, you'll still make it. Take me with you. This is Europe's most listened to independent radio show, live out of Salford, Greater Manchester, with the big old baldy bollocks himself, yours truly. Loads of comments on Heather Brunskell-Evans, by the way. Thanks for those. Go to twitter.com where it says search Twitter. If you put Richie Allen Show in, all one word, and press enter, you'll see what people are tweeting to me. If your tweet isn't read out during the programme, it's not because I didn't want to read it. It's that quite a few do come in and they just go down the page and they go down the page. And that's what happens. All right. But I look forward to hearing from you. And if you keep tweeting me, I'll get you eventually. Let me remind you, there is a new feature. It is car crash YouTubing. It is the worst live YouTube streaming there has ever been in the world ever. It is utter garbage. Presented by a man without a shred of makeup on his face. A man with a face-ogue, which is an Irish term. That's the Irish language for beard. A horrible beard and a big baldy head and a hooded top with terrible lighting and really cheap graphics. But other than that, it's all right. It's not too bad. Every weekday morning at 9:30, I'll be going through the UK newspapers on YouTube, and it's a little bit of fun. And I read out the comments, and we look at the front pages, and it takes about 30 minutes, and I'm enjoying it immensely. It's actually making the days a little bit more coherent, not coherent. The day is flowing a bit better for me having to do it. You see, once I said I'd do it, I had to do it eventually. Shall we move on, shall we? And talk about something that's very serious. Before we introduce my next guest, let me talk to you a little bit about this. Freedom of speech and freedom of thought. Now, Julia Hartley-Brewer is a broadcaster and journalist, and some of our listeners will know her from LBC. These days, she's a talk radio presenter. And it was announced over the weekend that Julia had been invited to speak at the Royal College of GPs conference, their annual conference. She was due to have a chat with them there, but then she was disinvited because of something she tweeted some years ago about Enoch Powell and the Rivers of Blood speech in 68, was it? Or something like that. She was disinvited. Just gone. This is happening at universities all over the country, not just here, but in other countries as well, where academics learned men and women, writers, authors, philosophers are being disenfranchised and deplatformed because of something they said or some opinion they spoke about or some opining they might have done some years ago. This is not news to my next guest. Now, I have a lot of time for this man. He's a fantastic, legendary award-winning journalist, Irish Times, Irish Independent. He's written terrific books, bestsellers. I can't recommend him highly enough. I grew up in my teens watching him taking part in debates on the Late Late Show in Dublin, Ireland. Let's welcome back to the programme Kevin Myers. Kevin, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you, Richie. Very good to be on your programme again, and I'm very well.
Thanks for coming on. I know despite everything that's gone on with you, I know you're still a very busy man and you're in demand. I know you know Julia Hartley-Brewer as well. Hers isn't an isolated case, Kevin. How serious is this type of thing, uninviting people because of some opinion made some years ago?
It's terribly serious. You're wrong. I hate to correct you. I'm not a busy man because of deliberate misinterpretation of things I said nearly 2 years ago. I have been dropped by almost all broadcasting outlets. No media outlet will touch me. Even though the Jews of Ireland have stood by me, I'm nonetheless on the internet. You'll see that I'm accused of being a Holocaust denier and an anti-Semite. Both of these allegations are completely untrue. They're complete fictions. I mean, they are 100% opposite of the truth, which the Jews of Ireland have repeatedly testified. Yet that is what my international and even national profile consists of. So Julia is could be facing, a very serious long-term problem. She offered an opinion about something several years ago about Enoch Powell's speech in 1968. It's quite a complex speech, which I have read at length, and it needs to be understood in the context of the time. As it happens, we all know that immigration had caused far greater problems than Powell had predicted. His language that he used was awful, and it shouldn't have been used, but it shouldn't have ended, as it did, in the prevention of any further discussion about immigration, not merely in Britain, but across Europe. We all know the consequences of this. Far worse than anyone would have expected, with, as all your listeners know, and you know, thousands and thousands of white prepubescent girls being abducted, drugged, got drunk, and raped, and their lives ruined. So we are dealing with a major issue here, a transformative issue within British life. And it was ignored for a long time simply because people didn't want to be seen. People in authority, the media, secondarily, but primarily the police forces, did not want to be accused of racism. So we are dealing with an issue that has to be discussed. She tweeted clumsily about it. I've read her tweet. It was clumsy. That's all it was. She is now looking at the conclusion to her career in public life, and I can speak with some authority about this because my career in public life was ended by the internet mob. And it can happen to anybody. It's happened to many people in America. It's happened to people in Britain. And it will continue to happen while mainstream media, instead of standing up for freedom of speech, leap on individuals and tear them apart when social media begins to target them. And there is no civilization compatible with this kind of draconian response to perhaps minor errors in the way you present an argument.
Let me remind our listeners, Kevin wrote an article a couple of years ago about the BBC gender pay gap row. And there was a playful comment in there about the success of a couple of Jewish presenters, and Kevin made an observation that Jews are not known for their stupidity when it comes to negotiating their contracts. What was really interesting for me about that at the time was I was in the air the following day on the way to Southampton on an airplane, sitting next to a Jewish guy, honest to God, who knew about this programme, and we were chatting about it, and he was laughing, and he said, Myers is right. We do think a bit more carefully about our financial transactions. We're not as loose with money as you are, Richie. He said it's a cultural thing. Kevin is also right to point out that Ireland's chief rabbi came out very strongly and said Kevin Myers is certainly no anti-Semite or Holocaust denier, but it didn't matter. Anyway, you weren't supported. And that's a really important point you're raising there. Journalists used to support other journalists when they were under the cosh for expressing an opinion or writing an article, but they are absent today, Kevin. Why?
No, they're not absent.
They're gone.
They're quite the opposite. They join in.
They join in, right.
Yeah, most of the people who attacked me were my fellow journalists. Now, if I was such an odious person over the previous decades of this century and of the last century, you would see a pattern of repeated attacks on me because my opinions are so awful. But the journalists who joined the lynch mobs, I've checked on their previous articles. Not one of them had anything serious to say about me over the previous 30 years. But what they saw their opportunity to do down a rival and also a cultural and philosophical opponent of theirs, because I am not part of the left liberal mob. I'm a critic of the left liberal mob. The left liberal mob saw this as an opportunity to destroy me, and duly did. Now, one of those people, a journalist called Fintan O'Toole in the Irish Times, had earlier won, or has since won, the George Orwell Award for contributions to journalism. Now, George Orwell, but the greatest journalist of the 20th century, perhaps in any language, certainly in English language, defended to the utmost the freedom of speech, and the primary freedom in any journalism is the right to be wrong. Never mind the right to say opinions that are wrong, perhaps other people disagree with, but to make an offering or make a suggestion, offer an opinion which on balance is incorrect, which is flawed, which is imprecise, which perhaps even offends people gratuitously. That's the point about freedom of speech, that you are allowed to be in the wrong and you are allowed to offend people. Otherwise, we retreat into our cantons and say nothing except the entirely predictable, pious, sanctimonious blather, which is what mainstream media now consists of, politically correct dogma, which is why one of the reasons why newspaper sales are falling. Why would you want to read a newspaper that says what you already know and think and feel? Why would you want your opinions confirmed when your opinions are those of the mob anyway?
Kevin.
Why would you spend money?
Why would you spend money on it?
Listen to a radio that's already saying what you already know.
You're a great journalist, Kevin, and I'm not kissing your arse. You're an amazing writer, and you're incredibly articulate, in print and out of print. I always felt reading you over the years that what you did brilliantly, and other men and women like you, was you set people's you got people talking. You got people talking about things, and nothing was taboo. Whether it was unmarried mothers, whether it's nationalism, whether it's immigration, whatever, you get people talking. And I want to stick with this thing of journalists not supporting one another for a minute, because I don't want to leave this go. I'm jumping between two stools here. One of the things that I'm really struck by today is something that's come to be known as virtue signalling. I think we've been conditioned as people in the media to look for opportunities to signal to the mob that we are virtuous. And I see it as some sort of new and weird kind of social crediting system that's truly frightening, really. So somebody sees, Myers said something about the Jews being clever when it comes to negotiating their contracts. That's an opportunity for me to take care of myself and to show the herd that I'm a good guy, and I'll attack Kevin Myers. I've not put that very eloquently, but that's something I've noticed, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I know. I didn't invent the term virtue signalling. I was aware of it several years ago. When political correctness arrived on these shores, that's say in Ireland, and around the same time as in Britain, I introduced a term which didn't catch on, which is a public piety competition. Yeah. That's what I used to say when journalists would enter a public piety competition, so would politicians, and it would be ostentatious displays of public piety. Now, there's nothing you can do about this, because it's a competition which is one way. It's one-dimensional. It's full of sanctimony, and it's completely lacking in intellectual analysis or even the necessary tools of intellectual analysis. All you can do is enter the competition, in which the only real features that exist and by which you'll be judged are your emotions. And the absence of intellect and the primacy of emotions means that there is no ability to analyze what's being said. All you have to do is join the mob. And that mob and the din it creates has grown louder and larger in the last 30 years. And it is 30 years since political correctness arrived on these shores. And when it first arrived, I thought it was an item that was going to be disposed of, like the hula hoop or the Davy Crockett hat of my childhood. No, they've taken over the world. And as Julia has discovered, it can really change your life. In my case, it has ended my public life. I mean, there is no way around that. There is no newspaper that would touch me, almost no radio station which would ever ask me to contribute to anything. I am dead in the public forum.
I don't think so, Kevin.
Extraordinary event.
I don't think so. I think, despite everything that's happening, I think there are still very many good folks, good men and women producing and doing stuff. I reckon these things do die down, and I reckon before too long somebody will say, Myers is brilliant, get Myers on. I reckon, I know you'll disagree with that.
There's one station that has me on once every 2 or 3 months. Otherwise, I am completely dead. Now, as it happens, I'm a man of a certain age, and I have a pension fund, and I'm not going to die of hunger. If I were 30 years of age, I would die of hunger. James Damore, the engineer who said, invited by, I think it was Google, to ask, why it was there were so few male engineers, and he said, as he'd been asked to give his opinion, he said maybe women have got different brains. He was immediately sacked. And then immediately became an object of internet opprobrium. Now, he has, I'm told, been given a job elsewhere, but lots of other young men and young women of his age, he was about 30, who transgressed the boundaries of political correctness, their careers would be over. I have forgotten the name of the young woman in public relations who was flying to South Africa, who tweeted stupidly, I'm on to the way to South Africa. Oh, I mustn't catch AIDS. No, I won't. I'm white. It was a joke. She was jet lagged. She shouldn't have said it. It's silly. We all make stupid jokes. She did. By the time she reached her destination in South Africa, not merely had she been sacked, but she was an international figure of loathing on social media. And I'm told she's barely worked since. This was 7 or 8 years ago. Now, she's a very famous case, and James Damore is a very famous case. But these are young lives wrecked by social media. And the extraordinary thing is there is no compassion and no contrition. J.K. Rowling, who has 17 million followers, joined the lynch mob on me.
Yeah.
So when she denounced me as an anti-Semite, she had reverberations around the world, and one of her followers was Chelsea Clinton, and she has millions of followers. And she wrote in too. So when this thing happens, as far as I can see, it's irreversible. I would not dream, I would not dare to check on my profile on the internet. It would be too distressing. It would damage my health if I saw what people are saying about me and the lies that they believed. But that's what happens when the big lie is told about you on the internet. It then becomes a far bigger fact for all time, because you can't erase things on the internet and social media. They remain there forever. No one has invented the engine that can delete lies that exist in the public domain on social media.
I've been dying to ask you this since you were last on, and you've seen it all. Academia, of course, your books, your articles for many years, your appearances on national television and radio. You've seen it all. When and why do you think we got to the stage where the gentleman said women have different brains and he got sacked? There was a time when people said things like that, rather than screaming narcissistic behaviour, demanding that people be fired, we used to have, right, get onto a lectern, get onto a platform, let's have a debate about that. When did things change from, do you really think that about women? Let's have a debate about it. I will annihilate you in front of an audience. How did it go from the old and good way to sack the man, bury him, get rid of him forever?
The 1960s. That was I'm a child in the 1960s. It was wonderful for me, sexual liberation and all that. And then what everyone did was they threw out the baby with the bath water and the plumbing and the taps and the bathroom floor and the ceiling and the walls. So there was nothing left in which you could wash. There was nothing left where you could have a proper debate. Everything was destroyed. All decency, all principle, all regulations, all understanding were destroyed by the 1960s revolution, which has been a cultural disaster at every level. I mean, it's destroyed the Catholic Church because they got rid of the Tridentine Mass. They got rid of the beautiful things about the Catholic tradition and introduced dribble as a substitute for the vernacular Mass in English or French or whatever. So there were so many things that were done and were done wrong at that point. And my generation, I'm an old man now, I don't say that with any pride, but my generation proved to be the worst parents in the history of Western civilization. We told children it really didn't matter what you think. All opinions are equally valid. And if ultimately the consequence of that was no opinions had any validity of themselves, and therefore, if you didn't like an opinion, you could shut it up. It wasn't necessary to justify or even to deconstruct an opinion. All you had to do was shout it down. So the cultural revolutions of the 1960s, which I enjoyed so much, have brought ruin, and I'm not exaggerating, ruin on Western civilization because people don't know what to think and they dare not defend traditional thinking on almost anything. And the primary element in traditional thinking is the freedom to think and the freedom to say your mind and not be silenced for all time, as I effectively have been by the social mob of 2 years ago. And the lies they tell, and the lies last much longer than the truth does.
So it's a post-fact word, and we'll come back to that in a second. I interviewed somebody I've had on regularly over the years. 3 weeks ago, I interviewed Peter Tatchell, and it was about, what was it about? Whatever it was about, we came around to talking about thinking. And I said to Tatchell, like it or lump it, Peter, you're going to have to accept that you live in a world with people who don't have or hold gay men and women in high regard. And you can't change that. The only time we should take an interest in that is when they become unlawful in any way or become abusive in any way that's genuinely harmful. But we just have to learn to live with the fact, I said to him, that there will always be people who think differently than others about matters of sexuality. And amazingly, despite the fact that Tatchell went through, what I call the real fight for gay rights back in the 70s and 80s when gays were getting their heads kicked in big cities around Europe for going to nightclubs and stuff, Peter Tatchell actually said to me, and I wish I dug out the audio for you, he actually said, well, it's unacceptable for people to think like that. And I shouted at him, well, what are you going to do about it? And he said, well, we can't put up with that in a society. People can't think like that. That's a terrifying thing for me to hear that.
That
for anybody.
Surprised me because I thought I admired a great deal of Peter Tatchell's
and I still do.
Courageous defence of homosexuals, and B, his single-handed campaign against Robert Mugabe and the homophobic culture of both Zimbabwe and Uganda. Now, I'm sorry to hear that he was saying these things. We have to be allowed to dislike people. People have to be allowed to dislike me and dislike things I do and say. That's a perfectly natural right. And you also have to be allowed to dislike homosexuals and homosexual acts and homosexual deeds and homosexual culture. Now, the homosexual culture is a very big one. It's got a lot of aspects to it which we, can't discuss here, not least because you and I probably don't know a great deal about it. No. But if you can discuss Catholic culture and discuss other aspects of Western life, you can discuss homosexual culture and express your dislike and disdain for those aspects, just as you can for anything about any aspect of human life. That human life and human beings are there to be discussed and deconstructed, but not destroyed. In any conversation, you may not leave a residue of hatred in the aftermath of what you're saying. You don't have to respect everybody, but you do have you do have to respect their right to live the way they want without being in any way abused or physically or their lives harmed. But you are allowed to say things that they find deeply offensive, just as any of your listeners can say things about me that I might find deeply offensive. That's what's called being a grown-up. And being a grown-up is something that was sacrificed a long time ago, when feelings began to be regarded as more important than people's thoughts. And feelings are always vulnerable to offence
and hurt.
So that's a shame. But get on with it.
What does it mean, Kevin?
Whatever you think, whatever your analysis is, that's not going to be affected by other people's deconstruction or criticism of what you say. Only your feelings will respond. Your brain doesn't. And we have effectively thrown away the brain as an organ which decides these matters. What we've done is we've placed primacy on emotions, and emotions will always introduce a veto, will always introduce hatred, and always will finally introduce silence.
You're a student, and at least when I was a student anyway, you're very much, most students, most, not all, but most, are very interested in left-wing matters and left-wing ideologies and principles and stuff like that. And I remember from time to time, somebody on the right would be coming to speak at the Students' Union or somewhere, and it was seen as a great thing. Lovely, we'll have a good old argument. Now, it's not happening anymore. We talked about Julia. It's happened to so many people. It's happened to Germaine Greer, incredibly, deplatformed by a Students' Union. You, of course, with all that academic experience yourself, what is it going to mean for men and women in the next 20, 30 years, coming into their 20s and mid-20s, having gone through the academias of the world? What is it going to mean for society? This paradigm, like this shift that we see happening, you said began in the 60s. What sort of people will be in charge, Kevin, in 25, 30 years' time?
I was recently giving some talks in Roscommon. There are kind of a few freakish groups will invite me to address them. And I said that we were on the verge of the Fourth Reich. Now, there were three Reichs. The first was the Holy Roman Empire. The second was Kaiser Bill's. The third was Hitler's. The Fourth Reich doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same as Hitler's, but it is a system of control and of single religion, which is incredibly intolerant and incredibly imperialistic. And what we're talking about now is imperialism of the mind, not the classical territorial imperialism. And what we are heading for is a new imperialism, and it's new imperialism which will be enforced by the professional classes. Now, contrary to what people might think, the vocational group that was most important within the Nazi Party wasn't kind of street thugs. It was lawyers. If you look at the early recruits to the National Socialist Party of Germany, the biggest number of them, of the influential types, were lawyers. And the other thing you should be remember, and people have forgotten this, the name of the party was National Socialists. They regarded themselves as left-wing. All of the genocides of the 20th century, of the Jews, of the dissident population in Russia, many millions, in Kampuchea and in Red China, all of these mass executions were done by self-styled socialists. And the flag of the Third Reich has red as its background because this denotes its socialism. And the people who are presenting us with the new horizons and the new paradise today of political correctness, they too would call themselves socialists and would call themselves left. And they are the ones who are exhibiting all the instruments and the philosophies of intolerance that made the 20th century the worst century in world history. Now, it's only 19 years into this century. We've no idea what lies ahead. But intellectually, I can see a wasteland and an intolerant wasteland where dissent is not possible. And when you have that kind of culture, in time, as opinions mutate, you'll find all sorts of things are possible as we forget the Ten Commandments. I mean, one of the things that I was talking about in Roscommon, which is a county in the centre of Ireland, was this extraordinary law, which has got no publicity in Europe that I know of, certainly not in Ireland or Britain, as much as I'm able to track these things, that New York State now allows abortion up to 9 months. You can abort a baby in a mother's womb up to 9 months. And the governor of New York State, Governor Cuomo, was so delighted at this that he floodlit a building in New York City with pink floodlights in celebration.
Jesus.
Earlier on this year, in early spring. Now, the idea that you could kill a baby in the womb at 9 months was the sort of thing, the experiments that the Nazis are doing. The Nazis didn't begin by murdering Jews. They began by murdering the mentally unwell, the physically strange, the troubled in mental hospitals or lunatic asylums, as they were called. And thousands of these unfortunates were murdered. And the first people to have the technical expertise required to gas Jews were not the SS, but they were hospital employees. They were nurses and doctors who thereupon began to do the very opposite of what they were trained to do. They violated the fundamental Hippocratic Oath. And they trained the SS in the murder of Jews by gassing. Now, that was a complete circle that was turned. And my feeling is that we are in academic life, and intellectual life, and in legal life, and in medical life. We are seeing an abandonment of the core principles which make those professions what they are. And they're turning them to something else. And just as Nazi lawyers framed the Nuremberg laws, so I can see, well, we've already seen in New York State, doctors and lawyers have agreed that it's okay to kill a baby at 9 months in the mother's womb. That's, to my mind, murder. There is no alternative word for that. No other explanation exists to describe what you're doing to a 9-month-old baby. A 9-month baby in the womb has its own personality, its own identity. It has its own soul. Yet New York has made that killing of that baby lawful, without commentary anywhere. I mean, no comment whatever in the Irish or the British media. So we have gone down a path towards gross immorality and wickedness. And I don't know where that path leads. I don't see any particular obstacle being raised to further murder becoming a norm. And by 1939 in the Third Reich, murder was a norm. So that when German troops invaded Poland in 1939, September thereafter, killing Jews was a casual kind of thing. In the first 2 years of the Third Reich, killing Jews was done by hand, done by They didn't have the gas, the great gas factories in Poland. What they had to do, what they didn't have to do, they chose to do, was to murder Jews collectively by individual Germans, and there was no conscience about that. No scruple, no great source of regret. This is what they did. These men had been programmed into killing Jews as a matter of course. And it looks now as if we've crossed a new threshold in another direction, in which you can treat 9-month-old babies in the womb as disposable objects. Now, where do we go from that? I don't know, because I wouldn't have said a year ago that we could be in the place we are in now. And everything that you hear, every day that you hear, some fresh advance of the politically correct agenda, which ruins some life, is accepted by the media. A new notch is ratcheted onto the kind of machinery of oppression, and no one notices, no one complains. Politicians are silent because they're dependent on a democratic mandate, and the democratic mandate just might be withdrawn from them if they become unpopular on the social media.
You're gone.
So this is a treadmill that is leading us to social disaster. And I'm not exaggerating my opinions on that. My opinions might be incorrect. But that's what I feel. That there has been no good news in the last 8 or 9 years.
But that story, Kevin, that story about New York is horrifying. Let's stay with the media just for a minute. Look, I've been talking about the transformation of the media for many years on programs like this, the loss of plurality. You've lived through it in Ireland. The radio stations, the piracy laws in the mid-1980s that led to the introduction of licensing. We got very many fewer, if I can say it like that. We have fewer radio stations, but you've also lived through regional and local newspapers being bought up around the world by major companies. This is surely the reason why people don't know about this stuff. It's because the media isn't what the media was 20, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, no one dare offer any sort of criticism of anything that seems like abortion. One of the reasons why I was delighted to be able to leave the Irish Times newsroom in the 1990s, because of the invention of the internet, I could work from home, which meant I didn't have to put up with the sneers and jeers of my colleagues. The first act of censorship is that act of censorship, self-censorship, that one does to appease one's colleagues. So if, for example, if you're seen to be critical of abortions, therefore you hate women, you're a misogynist, you're a reactionary, you're a bigot, you're a Catholic Neanderthal. All of these things. The terms of abuse are employed to diminish and reduce and abolish and people you disagree with. So that primary thing was something I was increasingly aware of in the Irish Times newsroom. The act of disdain, the sneer. I see you're at it again. So I began to be more than happy to be working from home. But that process within newsrooms has gathered pace, so that you don't really get controversial opinions or dissenting opinions within newspapers, because the first filter of self-censorship has already been implemented at the keyboard. You don't have then to worry too much about disdain from your colleagues when they read the newspaper. Oh, they read the screens, because your screen will what you're writing will come up on their screens, and they don't have to raise an eyebrow and sneer and say, you're at it again. If you conform, if you comply, you'll have a career the next day. Actually, you won't, because people are not buying newspapers anymore. They don't want to read the pabulum that newspapers offer. They don't want to read the pabulum and showbiz that newspapers now specialize in. I mean, that's instead of news and facts, we have show business on front pages of every newspaper, including the Times and the Telegraph. The Telegraph is a dismal parody of the great newspaper it once was. It's tragic seeing it. It's tragic.
Yeah, and I would have read those papers extensively when I was producing talk radio at WLR-FM in Waterford, and the quality of content has disappeared. I would endorse that wholeheartedly. I've also talked a lot about on this programme the growth and the rise of 24-hour-a-day news channels, and these days they are everywhere. They are on 24/7 in bars, they're on in gyms, and we used to have daytime soap operas, or we just used to listen to the radio in the afternoons if we were based at home. But now we've got these things on in the background, and they're not reporting news either. It's almost like a soap opera. It's kind of like a serial drama in our living rooms pretty much all day long. This is a new phenomenon, Kevin.
Yeah, it's disturbing. I don't turn on the television. I never watch television during the day. Having heard some of the things that were said about me, the lies that were being presented as facts on radio stations about me 2 years ago, I don't listen to the radio. I live in a kind of intellectual vacuum. I read books. I live in the countryside. I don't go out. There is no reason to go out. I mean, I will go to the shops, and ordinary people stood by me 2 years ago, but the media, I mean, they have cold-shouldered me. But it's a conclusive experience when it happens, but from which there is no going back as far as I can see. So, but much of what you're describing to me is completely unknown to me. I'm aware of the non-stop news channels, but it's not. You said it's like a soap opera. It's not like a soap opera. It is a soap opera.
Yeah. Well, the way
and that's what we're down to. It's just an endless regurgitation of pabulum, of nothing. It's bland. It's gruel. It has no content. What it is a diversion, and its purpose is to divert. It's not to inform.
I feel sometimes like I'm going crazy. There will be an attack somewhere in Europe, a terrorist attack, and what will happen, Kevin, I'll describe this very briefly to you. You won't believe your ears. But what will happen is Sky and the BBC will then put their main anchors onto a aeroplane. They will go to the scene of the attack, and they will stand there and broadcast for 3 days solid. 3 days. They will look. It's all very pathos filled. They will look solemn and they will look grim. And rather than ask questions about how it happened, they will spend hours talking about the heroes of the first responders. They will talk about heroic acts of the public. And then they will speak regularly about how our values will never be defeated. We will all stand up against the terrorism. Absent in all of this spectacle, and I've worked at nearly every level of the media, I've never seen anything like this. Absent is genuine questioning or debate around how this came to happen. That's why I use the term 24-hour-a-day soap opera. It's almost like watching Kiefer Sutherland in the Fox TV show 24. It is amazing. And you'll have Kay Burley there, you'll have the BBC presenters there for 3 days, and flowers, and talking about heroes.
That's
insane.
The big flowers.
Insane.
An analysis of who's doing what this or what.
None.
I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier in this conversation about the Muslim grooming gangs.
Yeah.
Raped 20, 30, 40,000 girls. We don't know. The figure is vast. It's far worse than anyone could have predicted. When the Christchurch massacre of Muslims, a filthy, wicked, vile act, occurred, everyone identified across the media denounced the culprit as a white supremacist. But when the comparable slaughter occurred in Sri Lanka, BBC led by saying it was probably done by Buddhists.
Probably, yeah.
BBC actually said it was probably done by Buddhists. They were so reluctant to grasp the truth that 99% of terrorism in the world is done by Muslim extremists. Now, lots of Muslims know this, and that they share the anguish of ordinary people, ordinary non-Muslims, at this going on, because it's done in the name of their religion, and rightly they feel anguish and shame about this. But it is pitiful that the victim communities, such as, say, Christian communities in Europe, and do not simply accept this is the truth. And meanwhile, the Christians of the Middle East are being murdered by these fanatics without any response whatever from European leaders.
Let me argue with you. Let me argue, Kevin.
Of Copts and of Yazidis in Egypt and Yazidis in Iraq.
You are right to say that. Let me argue with you. You're right to say that because it is true, and you're right to say whatever you want to say. You can say whatever you want here. Look, the intelligence agencies of the West have and do train, arm and finance lunatic jihadists to set them to burn in the Middle East. We know this. Millions of people were murdered by Tony Blair and George Bush, and Muslims listen to this program and they say, right, I hear you guys about the Muslim grooming gangs, you're right, but listen, millions of Muslims are murdered, millions, and this is what creates that refugee crisis. And they will say you and your friend Myers are ignoring this very salient fact.
Well, I'm not ignoring it. The question is, one level of neglect of truth, one level of denial of truth. The BBC is employed to tell the truth. That truth is also to do with all the wars in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how many people died because of, and the ignorance is genuine. I'm not being disingenuous. I don't know how many people died because of the American and British invasion of Iraq, but it has been a catastrophe. But that's unrelated to events in London. You can't. No rational, decent person of whatever religion could say, I can blow up a bus in London because of what happened in Iraq. Then we are embarked upon a war in perpetuity, in which it's all about revenge and all about atrocity. And wars that are based on revenge and atrocity are without end. They cannot end, because the motive is always provided by the latest atrocity. And there's a theology in Islam that justifies murder that is not present in Christianity. And the fact of the matter is that you can say alt-right did this and alt-right did that, but that's not the case. There is today almost no Christian paramilitary organization responsible for the murder of Muslim civilians. I'm not saying that no such creatures exist. They certainly existed in Christchurch. And I'm sorry that man in Christchurch wasn't killed. I mean, it's hateful to think that he'd be allowed to live the rest of his days in a prison cell. Absolutely hateful. Dreadful.
But the neocon Zionist cabal, the Bill Christals and the Wolfowitz and these guys, are still very much in control in DC. These are the guys behind the wars of aggression in Libya
I don't know
and
what
in
you're
Iraq.
talking about. I'm not
Well,
being
explain.
naive. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you talk about, Bill Kristol.
Well, I'll explain.
I don't know what that is.
I'll explain very quickly. There was a conservative think tank called the Project for the New American Century. Intellectuals that managed to hijack the Republican Party in the 70s and 80s, behind people like Donald Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and Kristol and all these guys, very influential with George H.W. Bush and very influential with his son. These are the architects, these guys, of the wars of aggression in Iraq and elsewhere, which did kill millions. These guys would strongly identify as conservative Christians. I'm not being disingenuous or childish either, but I'm just saying that, you know, Muslims in Syria and in other parts of the world will say this region is in ruins because lunatics like those guys in the West have prosecuted wars of aggression against us.
All those regions were in ruins already. Now, I'm not saying that the invasion of 2003 of Iraq it's the second invasion, by the way.
Yeah.
But Iraq was a basket case, and Syria was a basket case long before the West got involved. And the United States policy towards Iraq and to Syria was leave them alone. And look where that got us. It got us 9/11. It got us Afghanistan. It got the Islamic world in chaos long before the British and the Americans invaded Iraq. Now, you know, I was one of the few people in Ireland. I'm not proud of what I'm saying, but that, you know, the important thing here, Richie, is to speak the truth. I was one of the few people in Ireland who supported the invasion of Iraq primarily by the Americans. Now, I'm not proud of that, but that's what I thought. I thought something had to be done about Saddam Hussein, who'd used poison gas uniquely on his own people. He'd launched ballistic missiles into 3 or 4 neighboring states. He had exterminated large numbers of people. He was oppressing the Shias, he had half destroyed the Marsh Arabs. And I said that something needs to be done about that. And because UN sanctions were not working. Now, I'm not some dupe of the cabal you're talking about. I did an analysis. The analysis might have been wrong, but it wasn't because my brain was being manipulated by the sort of people you're talking about. All of these countries were in chaos. All of these countries were in chaos. There was no rule of law in half the Arab countries, and that's not because of anything done by a think tank in the United States of America in the final decade of the 20th century.
Yeah, but I would dispute.
And indeed, almost all Muslim societies, both in North Africa and across the world, are on the verge of chaos. All of them have permanent conditions of religious instability and violence.
Kevin, let me back in briefly.
The Americans and the British for what has happened in the Middle East is too simplistic.
Well, it's not.
It's simply wrong.
Well, let me jump back in there. You've had a good say there, my friend. Let me have a say. Look, I would dispute most of what you said there. I won't get too deep into it because my audience have heard my opinions on it many times. But there are a couple of facts, and you are a man of facts, and here's a couple of them for you. The first one is, in 2008, the United Nations, regularly visiting Syria, were very complimentary about the country and how it was meeting its millennial goals. Of course, Assad is an ophthalmologist who wasn't meant to be president in the first place. Much of the negative press about Syria, and indeed Iraq, by the way, which was given billions of dollars of weaponry by Donald Rumsfeld in 1980, 81, 82, so that he could prosecute a war against Iran. Most of the press that came out about Saddam Hussein, gassing his own people, weapons of mass destruction, it's been proven to be untrue. And I'm no fan of guys like Saddam Hussein either. So I would just dispute most of what you said, but respect you're coming to a different conclusion than me. Rather than waste the last few minutes we have on our differences of opinion around Iraq and around Syria, let's finish where we came in. And thanks for your time today, Kevin. It's great to have you on the programme. As somebody who's read you and listened to you for many years, I have great respect for you. I'm sorry that you're down in the dumps about what's happened.
Not down in the dumps.
I don't mean down the dump, but you're pessimistic about your own outlook, and I don't think you should be. I think you have a lot to offer, and there's a lot you can do for yourself. You know, you've got a great profile, and I just want to say that there's a lot of things you can do without depending on the establishment media to support you. I just want to go back to where we came in on the freedom of speech thing, and it's about Julian Assange, because today Donald Trump, of course, is visiting the United Kingdom, and met Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister. There was a press conference, and you won't be surprised to learn, maybe, that not a single member of the press thought to raise the issue of Julian Assange, who apparently is in Belmarsh at the moment and isn't very well, having been in a one-room facility in the Ecuadorian embassy for nearly 7.5, 8 years. Julian Assange, Kevin, what is your take on him before and what's happened to him before we run out of time today?
Yeah, the question is going to take me by surprise. I wasn't expecting to answer it. It's a very complex thing. My understanding of what he did with WikiLeaks led to, and I'm discussing it, I'm not making an argument, discussing what I know, that led to the large numbers of Islamic websites which had been penetrated by GCHQ and Fort Meade in Maryland. And they were watching what these Islamic websites were doing. They were able to keep track of Islamic terrorists through those websites, and they were obviously deeply encoded websites. When he did what he did, those websites went black. They went dark. And as a consequence of which, Fort Meade and GCHQ lost contact with an awful lot of Islamic jihadist networks. Now, I'm not offering an opinion about what happened to Julian Assange, what happened to him and the other chap in America, whose name I can't remember, and who's
Bradley Manning. Yeah, Bradley Manning,
yeah, Bradley. These are really important issues for the modern world we live in. How much may a state protect its secrets, and how much may a citizen reveal those secrets to the world? And I haven't got an answer to that. To either question, but I do know it is these are amongst the most important questions for establishing a civilization and B, rules to protect that civilization in the 21st century. And I don't know enough technologically or anything about computers to come up with any sort of answer. But this was an issue that is terribly important, and most people would, I think, I might be wrong here, would take the sympathetic view of Julian Assange. And there are two things here. One is the sexual assault thing, allegations in Sweden, and the other, the breaking of the codes and the WikiLeaks stuff. And it's been curious to see how the allegations in Sweden have been treated much more seriously than the WikiLeaks stuff, because the WikiLeaks stuff, if it's true as that what I have been told by senior members of the British Army, then those leaks caused people's deaths. I'm serious here now.
Yeah, I don't know about that, Kevin. Look, he released information about Guantanamo Bay, but particularly the Iraq war logs, which were definitely in the public interest. I think the United States is hell-bent on getting him there to punish him because of that whistleblowing. I'm not saying I'm his biggest fan either, but I do have a lot of sympathy for his situation.
I understand why you're saying that. And that's why I didn't express any absolute kind of real judgment on this, because I don't know enough. I have been told by really, really reliable sources that people died because of those revelations, not because of Guantanamo Bay. I'm talking about the revelations that led to Islamist websites being closed down, which were being used by GCHQ and Fort Meade to understand what was going on by ISIS and others. They then lost contact. Those websites went dark, and the people running them went dark. They became invisible. And people died because of that. Now, I don't know who died, and I don't know where they died, but I was told authoritatively they did. So, you obviously want to know more about Guantanamo Bay, and I do.
Yeah.
And it's right to know about these things. It's right, but I'm not talking about disclosure about conditions in a jail.
No, I hear you loud and clear. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Look, I'm
talking about other stuff. And, because I don't know enough about this, I can't draw boundaries. I can't say what's right and what's wrong. But this is one of our problems, Richie. We're not
informed
to discuss things
No.
in an adult way because we're not allowed to.
Well, we're not supposed to be on the same programme, Kevin. Kevin, you're speaking to me about Syria and about Iraq, and you've got a very different opinion than I do on those situations, and you have every right to have that opinion. But I'll have listeners, and I do have listeners now tweeting vociferously, outraged that you're on the programme because you don't see eye to eye with me on Iraq and Syria. But that's just bullshit. The whole point of doing radio programmes is that you speak with people whom have different points of view than the ones you have, and you listen to them, and that's the way it works.
Depressing. Why? What you've just said is so depressing. If they're listening to you and they don't agree with your rights to have who you want on air, then why aren't they listening to BBC Radio 2?
Some of them.
What are they doing listening to you?
Some of them. It's not all of them. It's just the way things are going. You know.
Well, why were they listening to you anyway?
I don't know.
Why are they complaining to a man who believes in free speech about free speech?
About having somebody on who sees the word a bit differently. Look, it's just the way I'm constantly lecturing my listeners not to be like that. Don't assume that because Kevin Myers is saying what he thinks about Iraq, that I agree with Kevin. And don't expect me to do a Jeremy Paxman hit job on you by constantly shouting at you and interrupting you, because that's just rubbish.
I might change my mind about this.
You might do, and I might do, exactly.
I mean, as I already have many times.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a mind, then you should change it.
Absolutely.
There's no point in having it, but it's just a set of dogmas otherwise. I mean, I'm astonished and I'm amazed and disappointed that people are complaining about free speech on a program which is dedicated to free speech.
Don't leave us with any disappointment, because it's only a tiny minority, and I'm breeding it out of my listeners.
Their time. There are things that they could listen to. They could put their head in marmalade. Probably a better use for their heads than listening to you and me.
But they, as you just said yourself, they might change their mind tomorrow. They might say, okay, so I didn't agree with Myers, but I enjoyed listening to him and I got something out of it. They might come to the conclusion that you just talked about. Do me a favour. It's said with the utmost sincerity. Don't wait to be asked to come back, Kevin. If there's something on your mind and you want to come back on and have a back and forth about it, please drop me an email. I meant it when I said I've loved reading you. I wouldn't dream of patronising you. Many things you wrote over the years that got my goat and that triggered me and that pissed me off. But that was wonderful because it got me thinking about things in a different way, and that's journalism. Come back anytime, mate. Loved having you on the programme today.
Okay, Richie.
Great to have you on, Kevin. Thank you.
Take care.
The brilliant Kevin Myers live on the Richie Allen Show, closing out the programme. 90 seconds to go before I close it out. Terrific guy. Agree with him or not, I hope he comes back on again real soon. I'm going to close out the programme now by thanking our guest today, Kevin Myers, and the wonderful Heather Brunskell-Evans, who was on the programme in the first hour. Going to close out with some Jeff Lynne. All right. That was good. And I'll be back with you again tomorrow, Wednesday, at the usual time of 5 p.m. UK time. Until then, look after yourselves and one another. And do share this programme when you see it appear on your social media accounts. Bye now.